Hey guys, and welcome to a new Dungeon Defenders 2 video. I'm your host Mr. Peter, and let's talk about the buff beam. This video here is to show you guys the best possible build for the buff beam and to demonstrate its strength in Onslaught. As always, I'll talk about the base kit of the tower and then move on to the build. If you guys are only interested in the build, I've got it written in the description below, and it's also timestamped so you guys can skip ahead to the build. How convenient. The buff beam is a utility tower and it has the same role as the booster, buffing towers. It will take a percentage of its own stats and give it to the other towers, stats like defense power and crit damage. It says it gives crit chance, but it actually doesn't give crit chance. That is a lie, just ignore that bit. The buff beam has a fixed range, so using the shard deadly strikes will not increase its range. However, you can extend the range by placing more nodes down at a cost of DU space. One strip of the buff beam will cost 60 DU, adding another strip will cost 30 more DU. You can place 4 nodes down, so in total, the max that you can spend on the buff beam is 120 DU. If I had to be honest, there's hardly ever a time you want to place more than 1 node down. 60 DU is quite expensive, so it's best to have 1 strip of buff beam instead of multiple. In order for the buff beam to buff towers, all the towers must be within the buff beam or extremely close to the buff beam. The buff beam zone is very strict. To know when a tower is getting buffed, there will be particles flaring around. As you can see, the flamer has it, but the LSA doesn't. If I put my LSA a lot closer, it's now getting buffed. However, there is an exception. Node type defenses like the Proton, the Reflect Beam and the Weapon Man are connected. If you are able to buff one node, you can buff all the nodes. As long as they pass the beam, all the nodes will be buffed no matter how far apart they are. Last thing to note, the buff beam cannot double stack the same buff beam on the same tower. Once the tower is buffed by the buff beam, you cannot buff it again with another buff beam. Also, the buff beam cannot be buffed by the booster and the booster cannot be buffed by the buff beam. They will both refuse to give each other stats. If it did work like that, that would cause an infinite cycle of buffing, which would be insane. Even though both towers are not compatible with each other, they can still work together and super buff other towers. Now you know about the base kit of the tower, let's go to the build. This is what I recommend: diverse power, diverse crit and power, with mass destruction, destruction and vampiric empowerment. The reason why I'm using the mods diverse power and diverse crit is to gather as much defense power and crit damage as I can possibly get. This tower is going to be surrounded by other towers, so it's going to get big chunks of stats because of these two mods. Really good stuff. Don't get confused with diverse crit and diverse critical. Diverse critical gives crit chance, which this tower does not give. A lot of people get confused between the two, just try not to make the same mistake. And lastly, we have power to give more defense power. You can use crit damage. Both of these mods are fantastic for this tower. It's up to you whether you want more defense power or more crit damage. For the shards, I'm stacking damage. Mass destruction will give us a huge amount of defense power. You can find this hyper shard in mastery or by completing primes. Destruction will give us a big amount of defense power, not as much as mass destruction, but still a good amount. You can find this shard in Chaos 1. And lastly, we have Vampiric Empowerment. This will convert the tower's health into defense power. I know this medallion's health is grayed out, but that's okay, it will still convert the tower's health into defense power. It's roughly about 8 to 10k defense power, which is not as much as destruction, but at least it's something. You can find the shard in Chaos 5. Vampiric is exchangeable, you can change it for defensive critical damage. This shard gives extra crit damage, that's if you want the additional crit damage. It's a campaign shard, but you can find the shard in Chaos 1. You can also exchange it for automation. Automation gives 100% tenacity. It doesn't say it in the description, but it has been tested out many times and it does in fact give 100% tenacity. Any tower that is using this hyper shard cannot be stunned by the cyborgs, it cannot be frozen by the ice dragon, and it cannot be downgraded by the Kazi mod. You can find this hyper shard in mastery or by doing primes. The last variant I'm going to talk about is using the mod Tenacity instead of power or crit damage. This mod allows us to focus on having more damage shards instead of using automation. I don't really recommend crafting this build because I myself don't use it, but eventually I will have to use this relic on Kazi lanes. But that's if whenever the Kazi lane becomes harder. I'm on floor 700 with no issues with that lane mod. For the Ascension, you will always want to put 20 points onto the attack rate in the defense tree. I know this tower doesn't benefit from attack rate, but your other towers do. If you have any available points left, put the rest onto the buff beam's power. In the utility tree, max out the defense crit damage and the defense crit chance, just so all the other towers can benefit from it. To summarize this up, I highly recommend build 1. It doesn't matter what level the mods are, obviously 10 the better, but as long as you have the mods, you're automatically making this tower stronger. It's your choice on choosing whether you want crit damage or defense power. If you're already using mass destruction on a different tower, you can go with this. If you want to use automation for its tenacity, it's best to replace either Vampiric empowerment or defensive critical damage, depending on what you want. For players who want to go higher than floor 700, you probably will need the extra utility to try to craft build 2. Tenacity does need to be a 10 and upgraded to Chaos 8 in order to have 100% tenacity. What's great about both of these builds is that you can use both of them on the booster as both towers function the same. So that's the build for the buff beam. Again, everything is written in the description below, so you can copy and paste it or screenshot it and enjoy the build. Alright, let's demonstrate this tower. Hey guys, and welcome back. I'm on floor 708. I'm going to be using build 1 of the buff beam. I'm also going to have Disruptor Pylon on my Proton, so the buff beam can get a huge amount of defense power from the Hyper Shard. This is how I would set up my defense on a double lane using the buff beam. I've made sure everything is touching the buff beam, so everything will get buffed. On this lane, I'm using 2 flame auras and I have a buff beam overlapping the auras, so everything is connected. Sorry, let me start this up. It's a big map and it's going to take a while to maneuver around. This lane has a Spellbreaker mod and I'm using explosive traps to counter it. Unfortunately, explosive traps take up a large amount of space, so I'm forced to extend the range of the buff beam. But that's okay though, I've got plenty of DD space left over. On this last lane, this is how I would set up my defense on a single lane. It has all the meta towers costing 200 DU to build, which is perfect. I'm going to check out the Spellbreaker lane, because, you know, it's a Spellbreaker lane. Normally this lane struggles a lot. Majority of the time I would have to babysit it. Surprisingly, it's doing great. Normally I would use the Dryad to cheese my way through this, but it's doing great. I don't have to do anything on this lane. That's fantastic. Oh, there's no one here. Wait a minute, I see a wave coming. I see a wave coming. Yeah, it seems fine. It looks like all the towers have enough stats to consistently wave clear. Nothing has gone through. Things are going great. The buff beam has perfectly filled the role of the booster. It seems like it can be an alternate option. Now the question is it better than the booster? A good question, but for another time. Both of them died. That's great news. I forgot to say this earlier in the video, buffing towers play a crucial role in the meta build. You can have a defense setup, but without defense power, that setup won't be strong enough to consistently kill them. That's where utilities like the booster comes in. The booster is feeding stats to everything. There's also other factors like Disruptor Pylon, your Ancient Power buff, your Ascension point, Gilded Destruction, you know, all these little things that affect your tower's defense power add up. If you can get all of them working together, you're going to have a really powerful defense setup. Okay, so Captain Dreadbones is on this lane. Let's check out how much defense power the buff beam can give. 4.52 million base damage, 9.5 million attack damage, that didn't update, 18.1 million attack damage at tier 4, 18.4 million, 18.7 million, 19.1 million with a 25.3 million DPS. Pretty damn good. Well, there you go guys, the towers had enough stats to kill Captain Dreadbones, who had just under 1 billion health. That'll be all for this video. Thank you guys for watching. If you learned something new or enjoyed this video, hit that like button, that's going to help out a lot. Subscribe for more DD2 content, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.